Today, the CIA Director John Brennan came out swinging here with strong words in the wake of that Senate report describing the CIA interrogation program following the 9/11 attacks. The release of that report, it has led to criticism of the U.S. around the globe. Harsh, abhorrent, and regrettable. Just a few of the ways that CIA Director John Brennan described the interrogation program used by his agency after the September 11th attacks.
They went outside of the bounds in terms of their actions as part of that interrogation process.
But Brennan forcefully defended his agency in the wake of the Senate Intelligence Committee's so-called torture report.
That helped the United States thwart attack plans, capture terrorists, and save lives.
The committee described in great detail physical assaults, humiliating abuse, and waterboarding. It concluded that the enhanced interrogation techniques, or EITs, authorized by the Bush administration were not effective. Today, Brennan agreed to a point. He said the CIA has not concluded that the use of these methods allowed the agency to obtain useful information, but
the cause and effect relationship between the use of EITs and useful information subsequently provided by the detainee is, in my view, unknowable.
The CIA director began by recalling the 9/11 attacks and the dark days that followed. He said that when the interrogation program was authorized, the CIA was in uncharted territory.
We were not prepared, and the individuals that were given the responsibility to carry out this work early on were ones that were trying to do their best, and I think at times came up short.
Now, Director Brennan's strong defense of the agency wasn't just aimed at lawmakers, but the thousands of CIA employees around the world who he says are doing many things right. Well, today I spoke with national security expert Karen Greenberg. She's also the director of the Center on National Security at Fordham Law School. You know, I just heard the Brennan press conference, and there were a few things out of that I'm curious your take on, which is, we have in the last 24 hours, we've heard from Dick Cheney, we've heard from Hayden and Gonzalez, and many folks from the Bush administration saying declaratively that because of this enhanced interrogation, torture, whatever you want to call it, American lives were saved and attacks were foiled. I've heard Brennan certainly defend the institution of the CIA, but not go so far because he's now saying it's unknowable. At the end of the day, can we get any clarity whether these techniques did or didn't save lives and were or were not in the national interest of America?
You know, this report is thorough, comprehensive. More than half of the 500 release pages consist of footnotes referring to documents and inter-office correspondence. The conclusion of the report is that there was no correlation between the abusive techniques, the torture, and thwarted attacks. That doesn't mean that in individual sessions there were facts that helped contribute to investigations one way or another, but it doesn't change the ultimate conclusion. And I think that's the space that these defenders are dancing around. The CIA has maintained for a long time that their way of putting together an investigation is a mosaic, so that it could be a little fact here and another little fact there. But to say that it was exclusively from interrogation, primarily from these coercive interrogations, or even at all from these interrogations, has yet to be shown in any way. And this report undermines any assertions in that regard.
You know, in microcosm, Karen, you hear both camps point to the case of Abu Zubaydah as an example, confirming either why these techniques were so important and delivered so much actionable intelligence, and others saying we learned little, if anything, from them. You've gone through the report. Taking that as a specific example, what conclusion did you draw?
You know, the conclusion about Abu Zubaydah really doesn't change from this report. It's consistent with the narrative we've seen before, which is that the FBI interrogated by lawful means Abu Zubaydah when he was first in custody and got a wealth of information from him that was actionable and that they used and relied upon. And weeks and months later, the Central Intelligence Agency interrogated him using coercive techniques. It's hard to say if they might have gotten some extra piece of information, but so much of what was got early on what was important, what led to capturing and identifying other individuals, high-level individuals, and others. And so this is knowable. Again, the CIA can come out and say that they got some fact or another fact, but the sequence here is very important.
You know, there's a bunch of questions I had coming out of this, but to you, the biggest red flag out of what we learned, and maybe even suspected before, is it that in effect, you had an agency working without oversight? There really were no checks and balances here, and we never had a national debate as to where we thought the line should start and stop. Or is it that when Congress did ask questions, they were either given incomplete or misinformation entirely? And finally, is it that, hey, we could have laws broken here, and at the end of the day, seemingly they were making up the stuff on the fly? What for you, using history as a context, gives you the most amount of pause about what we learned about the early years after 9/11 and how this project operated?
You know, that question goes to the heart of the matter. The fact is that what's really at issue here is it possible to have effective oversight over an agency that operates largely in secret and that depends and provides covert operations for the United States national security? And there are laws in place. There are protections in place. There is oversight in place. And so what we're learning through these interoffice memos and documents and reports and emails is that they were able to evade the mechanisms in place, either by hiding things or eventually by misrepresenting things, by excluding individuals in the White House and elsewhere from the process. And so it really does make you wonder, what is the future of oversight for the Central Intelligence Agency and other intelligence agencies for that matter? Is it possible to provide oversight? And I think that's the big question that faces the Congress and the American people now.
You know, I know it was more of a flip, it was a throwaway line in the Q&A period after Mr. Brennan gave his address today. And somebody was asking about the subject of transparency, and he was laughing, but he said, I think there's been more than enough transparency the last few weeks here. Can you have, by definition, Karen, an intelligence agency that has to operate in secrecy, but at the same time, whether it's the intelligence committees or whoever we designate, can you have transparency and secrecy at the same time, or they work at opposite purposes?
In theory, you need to be able to have both secrecy and transparency. But the mechanisms of oversight that are codified and embodied by the Congress need to be protected. And the problem is, are the regulations for secrecy going to be expanded to include all too much, and particularly to include things that go outside the law? And so that is really the heart of this matter, is what exactly happened in the name of secrecy and in the name of national security. The intelligence agenda of the United States government after 9/11 became all-consuming. It affected departments outside the Central Intelligence Agency and became an imperative for keeping us safe. And with that expanded intelligence portfolio came an increased defense of secrecy. And obviously, it went too far. The real problem here is how do you do this without having to put people in place that you trust all the time? Because what if somebody does try to abuse it? Is there no protection against it? Is there no mechanism that can stop it? And so this is a very disconcerting report.
And the final question is where we go from here. In effect here, Brendan has echoed what many has, is, hey, this is asked and answered. We screwed up along the way. We went too far. Mistakes were made. But you know what? The program's been disbanded. This ended 7 years ago. We don't do this anymore, so let's just look forward now. DOJ said there's not going to be prosecutions. At the end of the day, is there a postscript to this other than, yeah, we did make mistakes, let's not do it again, or does it go anywhere else?
Well, let's follow up on what you just said. when you want to move forward and not look backward, which is the path that President Obama has suggested in the past and that's now being suggested, one thing you have to say is that those who implemented the program should stop defending it. They should stop defending this as a way of keeping us safe. They should say, along the lines of what was said earlier today, look, we were in panic after 9/11. We didn't have our act together. We didn't know how to prevent things without resorting to a overzealous attack. But that's what we did, and we're sorry about it, and we wouldn't do it again. Instead, what you're hearing is, we would do it again. Those are the words of Vice President Dick Cheney. And others are echoing him, and that's a very different thing than saying we're moving on.
All right, when we come back, we're going to take a look at the battle brewing, not just in Capitol Hill, but also debates that we've heard here. I'm sure you're going to have one over your dining room table over whether what the CIA did was in the national interest or totally against about what America stands for. We'll be back with that conversation around this table when we come back.